welcome back to the Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity. We're having an amazing discussion with Hope Fitzgerald. So Hope, so you have this watery figure eight following you around for 3 days. You get subtly reminded that you said you'd be a willing vessel. Like, what happened next?
Well, as I said, they told me that I needed to create workshops about this, and I've had some higher degrees in education, and so I know. I say that only because when you teach, and I had been a teacher, I'd been a producer, I'd been a theatrical person, I performed, I was a singer, so I was used to leading.
Right.
And so there was not a discomfort in that. Right. I also was used to pulling a course together that would hang together and make sense. So when I was being told to teach about something I had no idea what it was, I was justifiably not only terrified, but how I didn't like this feeling of not knowing.
Right, because you had to just kind of show up and be present, and you're not really prepared.
And I had to. I went ahead and I reserved a room in December, and we were told to have 9 workshops. So the way it worked was 1 weekend a month, January through September.
Oh, wow.
And the full workshop was 3 of those weekends. So January, February, March. This was all doused out.
Okay.
And so I had no idea still when I booked the room, paid for it, how do I even, I had friends who were interested, and they did sign up, thank goodness. Very trusting, wonderful friends.
Thank goodness for those.
I had a very good friend who was by my side this whole time. And what she and I would do was to sit down once a week in the first 3 weeks of January, and I'd sit there with my rods and hope that something would happen. And sure enough, I felt myself, I would feel kind of a pressure coming in, and I would feel myself move to the side, and there was this urge to talk. I would talk in a different voice. I would talk often quite slowly, quite low down, like have this voice come out. And what ended up happening was, what came out were practices, were guided meditations. And so I thought, okay, I've got 3 guided meditations. I have a whole weekend workshop. And I went back to Findhorn because it wasn't like I was walking around talking about spiritual evolution, before any of this happened. Right. So I went back to Findhorn, and what they had taught us there about Teilhard de Chardin and his philosophies on evolution. And I sort of cobbled together a framework for thinking about spiritual evolution, but way down the line, this energy, this infinity wave I was learning a little bit about was a very futuristic technology. Okay. Not everybody initially at that time was going to get it, but those who could would be drawn to the work. So I cobbled together this thing, and I have to just speak a moment to what you said earlier about did I think I was going insane? Like you, all these books on my shelves were about people who'd had these breakthroughs and these visitations and all kinds of very woo-woo out there things. By the way, woo-woo in Chinese, that's the shaman of the village. So that's a real.
I never knew that.
That's actually an honor. That word. That is an honoring thing. So I'm.
Oh, wow. Now that's like totally brings it a whole new meaning
right,
to me.
Doesn't it? So, but these were, I was acquainted with all these kinds of breakthroughs and instances that all kinds of people had. I just never expected that I would be one of them. And so my rational mind kept arguing with the experiences that the other mind was having. And
right and left, like going at it.
totally. And I share this because at some point we make a decision about who we're going to listen to.
Yeah.
Now, all along, I'd been listening to my guidance with my rods and other ways, religiously. I mean, not to use that word lightly. Very dedicated. And so when this big new activity was happening, I found I was in another glass box, and I needed to shatter the image of myself that I had had just a few short days before, or a week before. And I had to keep shattering it as each new thing came in. I had never thought of myself as a channeler, and yet I was channeling because these were not my thoughts, my words.
And actually, the way you described it, how you like stepped aside and this pressure comes down. I mean, I've interviewed so many channelers on this show, and that's like a classic formula of what happens. You get very small, you get out of the way, and the energy comes in, and things start coming out of your mouth, and you don't even know how it got there.
Exactly. And half the time I didn't remember.
So you were a trance channeler?
Well, no, I was kind of in an in-between state.
In-between? Okay.
I could see the words coming down before they came out of my mouth.
Okay.
And every now and then there'd be a word that I didn't like.
Oh.
And now and then I'd try to go and like take that word out.
Uh-huh.
No.
Like what would be a word you didn't
like?
like?
One word in particular was the word detonator.
Oh.
I didn't like that word. It felt violent, right? But no, that word was absolutely precise and necessary in that particular channeling. So I learned very quickly that I'm not allowed to edit. And I'm an editor. I love to edit. Right? So again, more and more levels of trust and allowing. Yeah. And I say this because it was scary to show up with something that I didn't really know, that I didn't really understand fully, and to then lead a class in that. And I did not want to be a spiritual teacher. I didn't think of myself as that. I'm really I do feel like I am a guide, but not the teacher, in that head of the room kind of way. So
let me ask you, because I want to move along because we're getting short on time.
Yes.
So what happened in those workshops to your students? What happened to the people who showed up? Like how did they show up, and then what happened to them when they left?
Okay, that's exactly the thing I was going to say. They came in one way and they went out another. Okay. They came in, one was about to leave her husband, one had no work, one had a health problem, and they came out, and that woman never left her husband. Work came in the door, and I was able to track this, and I stood back sort of, with my scientific mind watching, because everybody feels good after a weekend of meditating and whatever. Sure. But this program looked to me like it had legs. It would last from month to month. The joy quotient went way up. People started to use the wave in all the ways that we were being told to use it in these channeled practices.
Can you give our audience just a little bit of an idea of what that means? Like, how do you use the wave? It's a watery figure eight. What do I do with it?
Okay, first of all, trust your imagination. You have to use your imagination, which is really our key to other worlds. And try not to poo-poo it. So you can imagine using this energy of any size. It can be microscopic. It can be all the way to the cosmos. You can use it in your body, for instance. If you have an ache or a pain, I've used it quite often with pain. Acute pain, you just turn the volume of the water up, make it run really fast, and then you just let it be. You let it run. And you can you use it in your heart to soften your heart. These days especially, going back to the fear that you talked about and the struggle, the heart tends to clench and get very tight. You put a wave in there, you put that figure eight in there, and you don't have to manufacture love and compassion. It's inherent in the flow.
Right.
So you just let that flow work in your heart. And sure enough, your heart starts to soften. You start to widen. You can make it as big as you want. And you start to expand and be able to tolerate some level of vulnerability, even in the face of all the things that are happening.
Okay.
So these are little ways to use the wave within the body. And by the way, if you're angry over something, take the wave, put it in wherever in your body that anger resides, and run it full tilt boogie. And instantaneously you will start to shift.
Right. So how about in your own life? I mean, as you're like teaching this, you're learning about how this thing works. Obviously, you're kind of being present. It's coming through, so it's all new to you too. How did you use it in your own life that it helped you?
Well, that particular example I was just
with
giving,
anger, yeah.
I had a teenager at home who was picking a fight with me one night, and I took myself out of it.
Okay.
Went to my bedroom, sat down. My belly was tight. I was so mad, and then like I could have had a V8. I realized, use the wave, dummy.
Right.
So I put it in my belly, and all I did was concentrate on that shape and letting the water run like a rushing river. And as I concentrated on that, I noticed that there was another aspect of me that started to relive the conversation and play the movie back, and I saw where I had contributed to not a great conversation.
Right.
And then the next thing that happened was I started to see what I could say to make it better. And then I started to actually find humor in the ridiculousness of it all. And when I opened my eyes, my body was relaxed, so the cortisol had stopped coursing through my veins, which we as women need because it stays in our bodies for 24 hours.
Oof.
So I opened my eyes. I thought maybe I'd been there for half an hour, 5 minutes.
Oh, wow. That quick.
Emotional 180 in 5 minutes.
Wow.
And I was able to go and talk to my child and set things straight. And we were both fine.
Oh, wow.
So that's one way to use it in the body, and I used it that way. I'm telling you that I have so many stories, but through the course of those 9 months, I learned so much. I developed these they gave me 9 practices, which I used and learned about over the course of the 9 months. And by the end of that, I was convinced that this is a real thing and that I was not insane. I was still a little afraid, but I was more confident that this was something legitimate because so many people had so many transformations and their joy went up.
Wonderful. Wow. Amazing. Amazing. Believe it or not, it's time for us to take our last commercial break of the show. Things go by so fast. So everybody, please stay tuned. When we come back, we'll catch up of like what's happened since then until today. And we'll let you know how to find out more about Hope and where to find her. So everybody, please stay tuned. You're listening to the Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, and we'll be right back.